Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Board Games Hitting My Table. So this is where I talk about all of the non-new to me games that I have been playing over the last couple of weeks. This episode covering the second half of September 2023. Now, before I get started on the games, and I have some good ones to talk about here, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Now, I also want to say that these games do not include any of the 10 latest games that I have played for the first time, and I'll be releasing a ranking video very shortly, probably within the next week. But let's get started with a 3-player game of Citrus. So Citrus, one of my favourite kind of abstract tile placement game, been in my collection for quite a long time now. And it's been a while since I've actually got this one to the table, and I thoroughly enjoyed this recent play. So this is a very simple, but can be pretty nasty and very kind of, I don't know, just an interesting game here as you are drafting these different tiles through this really cool kind of rows and column system. And you have to pay a coin for every one in the row or column. But you can see here on this grid, there are some points that are narrower than others, meaning that it's going to be more expensive or less expensive. But of course, as more tiles are getting taken, it's getting diminished, making the options different. So it's quite a dynamic little board state there. You're putting them on the board, you're claiming them as your own, but you have this very cool kind of economy system where you need to make sure you always have money, because if you don't, you cannot put anything new on the board. You're going to have to remove the meeples on your board, therefore giving up your kind of power, your influence in terms of the area control that's going on. But you need to make sure you do that to get new money in there. And you also get rewarded for having fewer people on the board. So there really is this kind of push and pull about how to how to manage your little workforce. It's this style of game that I'm really enjoying at the moment. It almost feels Knizian in its design, but this is from Jeffrey D. Allers, who's also made some great games by himself. But yeah, this is just a lovely game. Plays relatively quickly. You can play a longer version or a shorter version. Some good kind of chaining, some good confrontation, good kind of seizing land and trying to get it for yourself. It's just a lovely tile placement game that I highly recommend. And this one, after this most recent play, has climbed up quite a few spots in my personal rankings. So that is Citrus. Highly recommend looking into that one if you do not know about it. Let's move on then to something completely different here. We have Delicious. So recently I've been playing a lot of these pencil first games. This one is a bit different to the other ones because the other ones are more simple set collection games. Well, that is the case with Delicious. This one is kind of more of a flip and write style game as you're filling up these planters on your little player sheets here of either the same vegetable or fruits or different types and so on. But you're getting points depending on how many of those you fill. But there are some quite interesting restrictions here, as you only have a limited opportunity to either draft one of these cards from where they are, because your player sheet is basically divided in two between the top half and the bottom half. So you can either take a card as it is, you could take a card but in the opposite location, you could take two cards where they are, or you could take two cards wherever you want them. So as you can probably imagine, your options get squeezed, and therefore you'll end up sometimes not even being able to play cards at all. So it can be quite a frustrating game because you can't always do what you want to do. But generally speaking, I'm a big fan of this series, and I will be releasing a kind of a summary of all of the games and putting them in order from my least favourite to my most favourite. So I don't really want to say much more about Delicious because I will talk about it more in detail in those upcoming videos. Also played, of course, a 2-player game of Seven Wonders Duel, so the 2-player version of Seven Wonders. I'm going to assume you know how this game works with this drafting system and this pyramid of cards. And this was quite an interesting game because my opponent got kind of hot out the gates, started snatching all of the high points, or all the scoring cards basically. And if you didn't know, basically, if the game goes right to the end in this one, the winning condition will be victory points, but you can do a kind of sudden death instant win by winning from a military standpoint or through science. So considering I was already on the back foot in terms of victory points, I thought, let's go for the kill, let's go for the military, let's go for the science. And unfortunately, I got them both to the very end. I needed one more science symbol. I think I needed one more military point, but my opponent just managed to fend me off and bring it to points where I could not compete. So it was quite an interesting back and forth there, just always trying to keep me from getting that last card that I needed, and it managed to pay off for my opponents. But this is one of the best two-player games of all time. Absolutely phenomenal. I play a little bit with the Pantheon stuff. I don't use the God cards, but I do use some of the new progress tokens and the round 3 special cards as well. So I kind of have a hybrid between the base game and some of the expansion material. Also played I think it was a 2-player game. Yeah, it was a 2-player game of Ingenius. Recently reviewed this one on the channel as part of an abstract series. This one, lovely family weight tile placement game. I'm trying to build chains of these different symbols and getting points accordingly. Only your lowest category of each type will be your final score. So you could do great in 4 of them. If you left the other 2 behind, then your lowest one is your final score. So I really do enjoy that scoring system, and that played a huge part in this most recent game, as for some reason it was one of the tile types were just not coming out, and we were both struggling desperately for that particular type of scoring, and my opponent managed to squeeze 1 more point out of, I think it was the red shape, more than I did. So it's quite interesting how it came down to that one, and yeah, the smallest margin managed to swing it. But I said in my, I think in my review, this is one of those games that I'm never really going to object to play. So easy to set up and play, and it's just very enjoyable and satisfying when you pull off those big moves. So that is Ingenius. Still really enjoying that one, and I think I've even just pushed it up to a firm recommendation from me. Staying with Raah, I played a 2-player game of Raah, and this is another interesting game that played out, because Raah is one of those games where you can get into a bit of a free flow and not draw the Raah tiles. But in this most recent game, well, that is what happened. So we very rarely drew the Raah tiles out. So we were both acquiring tons and tons of tiles. I think I managed to pull ahead on quite a few of the categories in terms of always winning the pharaohs. I think that's what swung it for me, really. And I managed to get quite a good bang for my buck through the entire game. But I always talk about Raah, so I won't talk about this one much more. I love my new version. Definitely don't regret getting the new 25th century version of Raah, and it's become one of my favourite games of all time. So yeah, need to say I love this game. Also played some. Let's stay with Raah. Yeah, we played a 3-player game of Age of War. This is much more of a luck fest. You're rolling dice, Yahtzee style, trying to claim these cards here. Now, these cards have requirements on them, and you need to complete a row at a time. And if you cannot complete a row, you lose a dice from the pool, meaning your chances of completing that objective are they're definitely degraded. Really cool back and forth in this one. I have a bit of sentimental value for this one, actually, because I played it quite a lot over the years. I hadn't played it in probably maybe even 2 years since when I played this most recent time, and I'm really glad I kept hold of it, because I do actually really enjoy it, despite it being very simple. You're just rolling dice and claiming these cards, but I do like the fact that you can actually win them off each other, meaning there's a bit more player interaction. And if you're in the lead, you want to bring the game to an end by claiming the unclaimed cards, and hopefully ending it when you have the most points. But I think this came down to very small margins, only a few points in it, which is not normally the case. This seems to be, when I play this game, there's always a bit of a steamroller who ends up just smashing us. But that's not what happened this time, which was quite nice to see. I also played a 3-player game of a game I've not played in a long time. This is Game of Thrones Betwixt. So I actually sung this game's praises when it came out. This one's definitely not got much fanfare at all. The hype train of Game of Thrones has definitely died down a lot. But this is a fantasy flight game, as they have the license to Game of Thrones. And this is actually a bidding game. as you are bidding for these different characters, which will give you points, but you are sharing those points with each of your neighbours. So it's kind of called a small council. It has the between two cities scoring system, which has also been used in Splitto recently, where you're working with each of your neighbours, and the lowest score between you and your neighbours will be your final score. And if there's a tiebreaker, it will go to your next council. But this is such a weird and wacky game, as you have these cards, which are pretty nasty, as you'd expect with Game of Thrones. You are kind of sabotaging each other. You are just trying to wager on your ability to win these characters. All the characters do kind of game-breaking abilities, and I shouldn't really like this one on paper. You know, it has a lot of things that are quite unpredictable, quite swingy, but it all kind of works in favour for this game for some reason. And maybe it's because I don't have many games like this in my collection, so it feels quite distinct. It almost reminds me of Condottiere, which is a game, again, I love, and I know a lot of you guys like that game. And I'd say if you are a fan of, you know, a Game of Thrones and you like Condottiere, give this one a look, because it has that pacing of you trying to, you know, you don't get to replenish your cards. You have to know when to spend them, when to hold back, and when to push, you know, heavy for the characters that you want. This game we had came down to the smallest margins. I think it was the second tiebreaker, which is probably more likely to happen in a lower player count game, but I really did enjoy it. You know, 3 to 6 players, scales very well, and it's a hell of a lot of fun, especially if you like the IP. Moving on then, we played I think it was only a 2-player game of Rome in a Day. I think this game is better with more players actually, but I still like it. A lovely filler game, came out this year. I split you choose mechanism, very simple tile placement. You're placing the buildings next to the tiles and basically multiplying them. So if you've got 1 white building next to 3 white tiles, that's 3 points essentially. But you are dividing them up behind your screen. Your opponent gets to choose which pile they want of these tiles, and you get the remainder. And of course, you're choosing someone else at the same time, so you can get quite a mishmash of tiles, and you have to optimize your little puzzle here, which is not terribly difficult, but it is very relaxing. I think it's got some cool decisions, as you don't want to give your opponent too good of an offer, really, but you still want to get what you want as well. So yes, definitely a fine balancing act. I'm leaning towards giving this one a firm recommendation. At the moment, I have it just below that, because I want to see if this game can really go the distance. I've played it quite a few times now, and I'm leaning towards giving it a commendation. But that is Rome in a Day. Moving on, we have played a 3-player game of Pergamon. Pergamon, I love this game. This game is so much fun. One of the most misleading games that I have. You know, from the box here, it looks like a very dry, forgettable Euro. The gameplay could not be any different than that. It is a Euro, but it's definitely on the lighter end of the scale. Has one of the coolest mechanisms that I've seen, period, where you have a random amount of money that comes out. You have a rough estimation of what's on the other side of these cards, and then you're basically putting your meeples down on this track here. Now, the earlier you go means you're going to get the first dibs on what's in that pool of money, and you also go first in initiative order. But if you go later and there's still any money remaining in that bag, then you'll get what's left of it. And when that third player comes into the mix, it gets even more interesting, because you can be greedy and get left with nothing. You can be greedy and get tons. And at the same time, you need to factor in which tiles do I want from this archaeological dig in order to patch them together, because you can see they all come in halves. Put on these exhibits and start getting points for them. Even having the order exhibits at certain times in the scoring turn order is important. And it's not a terribly high scoring game, and you need to know when to kind of stockpile your money, because money in this game is generally quite tight, and know when to push for the exact tiles that you want. You know, sometimes in this game, this even played out quite a few times in the game we just played, you're willing to sacrifice all the money just so you go first in turn order and get the exact tiles that you want. An absolute blast of a game. I think this one's even shot up a whole point in terms of, you know, going from like a 7 to an 8, from this most recent play because I forgot how much I enjoy it. And yeah, it's going to do well in my rankings, I think, this year. That is Pergamon, an absolute blast, and I highly recommend you check this definitely hidden gem out. Moving on then, we played a 3-player game of Cartographers. As you can see, we have the kind of collector's edition here with the additional maps. Now, I like Cartographers. I tend to like these puzzly roll and write style games. I like the scoring system that's been kind of stolen from Isle of Skye, where you have variable objectives. This one, you are simply, you know, trying to achieve as many objectives as you can by placing these different terrain types on this grid, essentially. Now, it's pretty simple stuff, but there's one mechanism that I absolutely despise in this game, which is you get to draw monsters on your opponent's score sheets to basically sabotage them and mess with their planning. Now, I understand that's one of the unique things about this game. A lot of people are going to like that. It really does wind me up. I don't like it at all, to be honest. So I think that's a massive detriment to this game, and I would rather play without those monsters and just focus on my own puzzle. But it's fine, you know, I do prefer other roll and write games, but this one's still a solid 6 out of 10, I think. That is Cartographers. I've also played a few games that I don't have the physical copies of here, the first of which being Revive. Revive, one of my favourite games from last year. Definitely a more traditional Euro, lots of combos, lots of endgame scoring. I actually played a solo mode of this because I was quite itching to get it to the table. And you know, I do like this game a lot. You know, it's one, as I said, it was one of my favourite games from last year. I do have a few problems that have started to kind of come to the surface of this one. I don't think the game throws enough tactical obstacles at you, and you can kind of just plan what you're going to do and then stick to the game plan for the rest of the game, and not really have much to overcome en route or on the way of that. So I tend to generally lean towards strategic games, but I do like tactical problems being thrown at me as the game progresses, and I don't think this game does enough of that. But as a solo game, it works very well. You know, you've got to manage your hand of cards, you get a fixed amount of turns. In fact, you get a fixed amount of card plays, and like the rejuvenation action where you get to take the cards back into your hand. And you just tally up your final score based on this chart, essentially. So very simple solo mode, no fiddly, no Autobot or anything like that that you need to manage, which I actually like, and I prefer that style of solo game. But yeah, this game didn't go down tremendously well with my gaming group when I played it, hence why I wanted to play it again solo to see if it's worth another shot. And although I like this game a lot, and I can certainly see why so many people adore it, the combos are fantastic, the engine building is fantastic. I'm just not quite sure it's a right fit for my collection right now. So that is Revive. I also managed to get Raccoon Tycoon back to the table, a friend's copy of this. A very simple little, kind of my first economy game, really, economic game. Buying and selling goods, buying these cards for scoring, very simple stuff, but I like it. Lovely artwork as well. And also played a 3-player game of Brian Buru, which is actually I think it's a Piers Sylvester game, who's most known for The King is Dead. I think I'm right on that, I could be wrong. But this is kind of a trick-taking area control game with some very cool mechanisms, actually. I actually really do love the card play here, as you are trying to deliberately win or lose tricks sometimes. Because if you lose with certain types of cards, you can actually get some really nice bonuses. But if you win, you are competing for area control in these different regions. Now, I think some of the additional mechanisms, like in terms of climbing these separate tracks to get some extra cards, getting these little Viking tokens, I think that's kind of, I don't know, I think they kind of missed an opportunity to make that stuff engaging by itself, and it's not as strong as the actual card mechanism. So I feel like we've got a really good foundation for a game here, but there could be rooms to make this an excellent game. I really do feel that way. I think at the moment, I think it's fine. I do enjoy it. Again, probably another 6 out of 10. Some cool artwork. And again, I love that kind of area control trick-taking hybrid. But the rest of it, I feel, is somewhat tacked on. And I also want to talk about another game here, which will feature in my ranking video. This is Groundbreakers. I said to the designer of the game, I'll talk about it a little bit more during my my hitting the table video. Now, this was sent to me by the designer for review. Unfortunately, it's not the kind of game that I normally cover on the channel, and I wasn't expecting it to be like this, if I'm honest. But from the cover here, you'll probably think it's maybe a Civ style game, some kind of innovation style game, but it's not. It's actually a kind of a, what do you call it, an exploding kittens variant, I called it, where you have a hand of cards. This one you're giving a leader card as well, where it lets you draw more cards and give you a slight special power. You're basically trying to shed as many cards as you can from your hand. The cards come in these different sets, they come in different ages as well, and as the game plays on, the new ages will reveal themselves, giving you the ability to play more powerful cards. The cards themselves are very standard stuff. Now, you can play the set collection cards where you can burn one off if the age matches, but if you have the 1, 2 and 3 of each type, then you can get rid of all of them at once. You have some kind of like ability cards, reaction cards as well, so you can cancel the effect of other players, and you're essentially trying to shed through your cards as quickly as you can, catch your opponents off guard so that they still have cards in their hand, and for every card they have left in their hand they score negative points essentially, which is not a good thing, of course. You can play over several rounds if you like, and then just tally up your final score at the end. So this is one of those games that kind of plays itself, but I know there is a big market for them. You know, these Exploding Kittens variants, there's tons of them, and this one has some really nice artwork, but you know, the gameplay is, as I've explained already, there isn't really any decisions you have to make here. And if I'm talking about shedding games that I would recommend, I would stick to the ones I talk about on the channel, such as a Bluxon, also known as Linko, games such as Scout, and even Mask Men by Oink. You know, they're fantastic shedding games. This one's a bit more, I don't know, a bit more of a mainstream audience, I think, and I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the artwork and the gameplay as well. But best of luck with the campaign. I think it's going on Kickstarter fairly soon, so if this is your cup of tea, and I know that some of you guys like these styles of games, because I think I've previously criticised them and I've had some blowback on that, be sure to keep an eye out on the campaign there. So that concludes the video. That's all the games that I have been playing. Hopefully you have enjoyed this video as much as I've enjoyed playing some of these fantastic games. So if you have enjoyed it, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other content. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.